Morning again, everyone. I think we're just about ready to resume. Mr. Howarth, welcome to you. I can see your, I was going to say smiling face, but you're not smiling at the minute. Maybe you will shortly. Welcome. We'll hear from you later on. We're due to hear from Middlemas Farm Holdings and the Buckland Country Living Landowners Group and the surveying company, all of whom are represented by you, Mr. Fuller. So we're then due to hear from Mr. Crisp. I need to declare the conflict that's recorded in our documentation. I'll take no part in that process. Then we're going to hear from Mr. Finley and then finally Mr. Howarth. I think everyone other than Mr. Howarth were present earlier in the day, just looking at the screen. Mr. Howarth, we're going to run this pretty much the same way that we run regular hearings. It's just that we're all looking at each other on a screen rather than face-to-face around the table or across a hearing room. We'll hear from the submitters. We'll ask any questions. Submitters on the individual topics are obviously welcome to listen, but we'll hear from you in your allotted slot rather than as we go sort of ad hoc. So I think without further ado, Mr. Fuller, we're in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I see that Mr. Hartley is with us as well. He'll be speaking after I have finished.
Thank you.
I trust everybody's kitchen cafes delivered some good coffee. So I did just a short time ago, they are just materials that otherwise I would have just handed up in hard copy. I did send to Sandra just an email with basically just a little printout of a survey plan with an averaging versus a normal subdivision. But if that's of assistance to the panel, I'll speak to that later. If that could be just emailed and forwarded to the panel, that would be appreciated. Yes, just addressing my legal submissions. On the first section, I've just spoken about the respective groups, and in the appendix is the schedule of the Buckland Landowners Group. There are about 30 odd participants in that group. They have made individual submissions, and I've acknowledged that that group doesn't have submissions on the provisions per se, but is obviously interested in the outcome because it is seeking this now rural lifestyle zone in its relief. But the survey company itself has put in fairly substantial submissions, and we are pleased that many of those, in fact most, have in fact been agreed to. So they were motivated just to try and ensure that the provisions were workable from their perspective. So that's good. So in paragraph 6, 7 and 8, I just discuss briefly the earthworks, minor dwellings and stream setback provisions, which we essentially agree with. Mr. Hartley does still have an issue, I think, with just clarification of the definitions around garages, which he can speak to in his evidence. And he does have in his note, his speaking note, just a little suggestion about how that could be further clarified, so he can address that then. So minimum average lot sizes is for us, I think you can see the primary issue in this hearing. And we're obviously not quite on the same page with the reporting officer in that regard. In paragraph 12, I've highlighted the particular main reasons, I suppose, on merit that we think that this is a good option to retain the plan or to introduce into the plan because it provides for superior landscape and design outcomes. There's more choice of building platforms, etc. It also, I think importantly, if you've got remnant bush on a property, it allows it to be retained more easily in a single parcel and managed, which I think is a significant benefit. It provides more choice, but also, and that's what the example from the survey company shows, I'm not sure if that's been circulated, but if you've got a situation where you've got an existing house on a property that in some ways compromises the options for doing minimums of 5,000, having an averaging approach can in fact fairly significantly increase the options for developing a site in a way that also actually achieves the council's objectives of, for example, retaining open space character. And that little example is an illustration of that very point. So just addressing the very interesting and useful discussion, I think, this morning, on page 5 in paragraph 13, I've just here quoted the officer's main reason, I suppose, for concern about the approval of a rule which would allow a situation of averaging. And it is a concern that if you have averaging and you have 3,000 square metre lots, it becomes significantly more challenging to decline a subdivision with undersized lots. I think we have actually had a very useful discussion led by you, Mr. Chair, this morning, and I've alluded to it in paragraph 14. There is a very, very strong objective and policy framework here. We do have the word avoid, and I just do see how, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback there now. I'm not sure if others can hear that, but I do know. I struggle.
Just interrupting for a second. If you're not speaking and you're just one of the submitters that's waiting for your turn, if you could just mute your microphones, I think that will that should help.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's better, yes. So you've got policy 5.6.3, the creation of undersized lots is avoided, and obviously there was a bit of a let out provision that's been now deleted, and we haven't opposed that, but we do think that that combined with the non-complying activity status in the rule table, as you've pointed out, Mr. Chair, effectively is a prohibition. We just do not see how you could ever grant a consent and not be contrary to that provision. And that goes right back to Batchelor, where notwithstanding the fact that, for example, you may get through an effects-based test in the gateway, obviously that doesn't preclude a full assessment in the round of the objectives and policies. And also, as we'd be aware, this is not an example where some activity, for example, wasn't contemplated. You can't get more explicitly expression of the fact that this issue of undersized lots has been contemplated by the plan, and a very strong framework has been set up to avoid it. So this is quite different, where sometimes a plan just has a bit of a policy gap, you might say, and that's been fairly well canvassed in the case law. And you can go right back to cases like Todd, Queenstown Lakes District Council, where that was exactly an example of an undersized lot, and the court was very strong that this is a major policy shift in the plan and it shouldn't be granted because these sorts of things should be open to scrutiny. So with respect, I suppose that leaves us in the position, Mr. Chair, where in some ways, and no doubt the officer will comment, but the main reason for opposing an averaging approach, which was this fear that if you have 3,000 square metres, therefore somehow you've set a new low benchmark for undersized lots, is not really, in my submission, how the plan would actually work. Another way, I suppose, of suggesting it is that the averaging does not avoid the avoidance policy. You would still have, with averaging, a very strong framework to basically decline applications that were undersized based on undersized averaging, to the extent, and Mr. Hartley can probably comment, but as a lawyer, I'd be suggesting that don't bother. It's just a rule framework that is very solid and very sound, and it's going to lead to an inevitable decline in my submission. So that's, I suppose, pulling together the discussion this morning on the objectives and policies and the activity status, and also highlighting what we do feel is a merit. There is merit in our view in having some flexibility around the way that lots can be created to do things such as retaining productive capacity. If we wanted to elevate the design outcomes, I have suggested, almost as an alternative, I suppose, that we could expand on the RDA criteria by pulling through the objectives and policies. As we've seen, there's really only one RDA criteria, which is adverse effect on amenity values. I think we're all aware that that doesn't preclude an officer of the council in paragraph 17. I've alluded to this, going back to the objectives and policies and saying, what does this mean in terms of amenity values? And there they can see things like views to the Waikato River and things like that. So that's all good. We could arguably pull out some of those objectives and policy key points and put them in the assessment criteria, which may assist at the assessment stage to achieve the sort of outcomes the council wants to achieve in terms of rural character and open space, etc. So basically, and then towards the end of the submissions, I've already just reiterated that in our view, averaging does provide some flexibility, particularly where you do have this fairly rigid avoidance. It provides a little bit of flexibility, but within still a framework where if the averaging didn't meet the minimum thresholds on average, it could be declined quite easily in our view. So that's really, unless there's questions, all I had to say, and otherwise, I'm not sure if that email came through. There is the little picture of the different, it's basically just plucked out of the air. I don't even know who owns that site. But Mr. Forrester from the surveying company has helpfully just taken, I think it must be a 1 hectare site, and it's got an existing house on it. And one of them is an averaging approach, and that's just a hypothetical boundary that could be drawn. In our view, that approach actually confines the house and retains more potential open space to the road frontage, which is one of the objectives, I understand, of the policies, which is fine, that's good. That retains rural character, as against a 5,000 sort of regimented regime, where you do have to have things like the right of way. You've got the house potentially taking up and occupying a lot more space. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily how that site would be developed. This was done as a desktop exercise, merely to illustrate the sort of flexibility that, based on his experience as a surveyor, when you've got an existing house, you're often quite restricted, and an averaging approach can lead to a more sophisticated and nuanced response that can create more choice and also retain rural production, for example, a bit more easily as well. So that was just a little example of that. Sorry, Mr. Chair, you may be still muted. I didn't quite catch the start of that.
All around? I felt here.
Sorry, I was muted and I forgot. Our attendance register says that you're appearing today also for Middlemas Farm Holdings. Is that the case, or is that just attracted your name to another submitter that you're doing other submissions for?
So they are in fact a further submitter on this topic. Yeah. They asked further submitter 1330, but understood. Effectively, these parties are sort of working together. There's some relationships with the.
It's just that your submissions don't refer to them. At least I don't think they do. And we should amend our notes to say that the submissions that you've presented today are also on behalf of Middlemas Farms. Correct?
Very happy for you to do that, sir. They were just a further submitter and
okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
I think Ms. Kelly has just sent us the email that you sent to her just before. I think we'll wait and hear from Mr. Hartley, and then we can ask questions of the both of you in the round, because I think we're still missing a bit of the picture that Mr. Hartley will paint for us. So let's hear from him, and then we'll come back. Mr. Hartley, you've got some speaking notes that have come through in that same email, I believe.
I hope they've arrived. Can you hear me all right, Mr. Chair?
Yes, I can. I just double check that everyone else can. I think so.
This is okay.
Good. Yep. Fine. Yes, I have just a a brief summary of the key points of my my primary evidence. If you like, I'll just briefly go over those. The earthworks volumes, I agreed with the 500 cubic metres, and as proposed by the council planners, and with the standards, they would work well in my view. In regard to minor dwellings, I'm very supportive of the use of or the provision for minor dwellings. I think they provide an important social asset in rural areas or semi-rural areas, as well as urban. The only matter, and I did see in the rebuttal evidence, the suggestion that the GFA would include garages because it defines a building by the external walls, which obviously, if it was an attached garage, that would be included within the 70. I just really maintain my position that I think a typical minor dwelling of 65, 70 square metres is often without a garage included, and to include a single or double garage within that is going to be fairly compromising for a 1 or 2 bedroom minor unit. And my suggestion would be where I've got in the summary there, excluding decks and garages. I think we could safely delete decks and just have excluding garages. So the 70 square metres would be the GFA as defined or proposed to be defined. But I think you could actually add to that excluding garages, just to allow a garage to be attached. Otherwise, I think as Mr. Chignall identified, a separate garage could probably be built and not be caught or captured by that 70 square metres. So what you're in effect doing is forcing landowners to build garages away from the minor dwelling, and that may be counterintuitive or counterproductive. So I think that simple change would address that. Stream setbacks, I've agreed and would support the 10 metre setback, and I've noted that's also consistent with the regional plan. And I maintain, I have considered the rebuttal comments, but I maintain that the averaging provision for 5,000 with a minimum of 3 would be an entirely appropriate approach. For the reasons I've outlined there, they do allow a little bit more flexibility in design, working around existing site features. If you've got existing dwellings, and a good example I think has been provided by Mr. Fuller about a subdivision with an existing dwelling and making a more sensible boundary arrangement, whilst not increasing density. The density remains at the 5. In reference to the restricted discretionary matters, I believe that the reference to amenity is appropriate and would allow reference to the relevant policies where a council planner or an e-planner assessing a proposal wanted to understand what the intent was in terms of that reference to amenity. And you can go back to that policy and you can see the more prescriptive concerns or requirements that the council wants to see addressed. And I think that alone should prevent the sorts of concerns the council is concerned about perhaps sites being arrayed along a street or a road, a rural road. That those references would allow that to be addressed. I also note that, and listening to the evidence for Hamilton City, the concern, at least in one area, about providing for any future development, particularly future urban development. Again, having an averaging provision does allow larger balanced sites or balanced lots. And if an area is urbanised in 10, 20, 30 years, having some smaller sites that were subdivided under an averaging minimum rule would allow some larger sites, which typically mean that you can retrofit roads and parks and other things that urban development requires. So that would complete my summary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Let's just see if there's any questions. Let's start with you this time, Mr. Cooney, please.
Oh yes, thank you very much for your submissions and focusing on what's an important issue in this whole debate. Just your point, and I think Mr. Fuller also made it. Having an averaging allows you to reconfigure your sites better. And can you just explain why that is so? Because surely the question I ask myself is, well, surely the greater, being the 5,000, you can still reconfigure your site to take into account building platforms and so forth and more sensitive areas using the larger area rather than the smaller. So can you just explain why you say that?
Well, I think, and perhaps you haven't got the example that Mr. Fuller sent through, but
no.
Yes, when you do get that, you'll see, I think, a pretty good example of how that works. If you have a 1 hectare site, 10,000 square metre site, and there's an existing dwelling, which is often the case, the landowner in that situation is required to subdivide the site exactly in half, irrespective of where the driveways or the swimming pool or the landscaping is. Whereas if there's the ability to have a 3,000 square metre site, perhaps at the roadside, and a 7,000 in the balance area, you can start to work around those sorts of features and keep them where they properly belong. Another example is if you have 4 or 5 hectares, that does mean that you can retain a larger balance area, which might be more respectful of existing bush areas or streams or similar factors. Or even.
Can I just stop you there for a second, Mr. Hartley? Not to wish to interrupt you, but Ms. Kelly, you will have a copy of this email, and I can't share my screen, but you can. Could you put Mr. Hartley's sort of second scenario with the 3,000 and 7,000 square metre lots up on the screen, please, so that we can relate the conversation he's having to something specific? You're on mute, but you've given us I can lip read and you've said fine, so that's good. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Hartley, but I think if we've got this drawing, and I think if we have this drawing in front of you, it might give a bit more
that'd be helpful.
Context to what you're saying.
Yeah, I haven't seen it come up, but
No, it's not there yet. I think it just takes a second.
perhaps while it's coming up, Mr. Chair, just to protect your time somewhat, and in situations where you've got a large area, as I was just speaking to, often this, as you may be aware, it's often the site constraints or geotechnical constraints can mean that the building platforms tend to have to be in 1 or 2 areas perhaps, and not in other parts of a land holding. And when you're trying to not only, because you always work from your building platforms often, and when you're trying to work from those and fit, I'll interrupt myself.
Can you just explain that now again while it's up on there?
I think you might need to minimise that, Ms. Kelly. That's we can see all the bits of the diagram except the important bit.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah, bit further down.
So
there we go. Whoa, up a bit.
Yep. So
perfect. Thank you.
That's what somebody is required to do to meet the 5,000 minimum.
Yeah.
So
where's the beef in that? Put it colloquially.
Well, I think there's I think there what you've got is the main access road is totally bisected. So you've got then the requirement for lot 2 to create a new access point running up beside another existing house, which they may or may not be happy about. And effectively, it is two separate sites. Whereas if you look at the alternative example with an averaging provision, which I think is on the same email or same photo when I saw it the other day.
Yeah, it is. If we could have a look at the other one, Ms. Kelly, please. Just need to go up a little bit. Whoa. It'll
So,
do. Perfect.
and I think that's a good example where, I mean, you might discuss the site, one of the alignments, the boundaries a little or something, but I think that's an example where you have houses in pretty much exactly the same place. In both examples, the building platform's likely to be in the same place, but you have an example where the site is able to more easily adapt to what's been built already. Now, the access way could be retained, in my view, and it may be there as an easement over lot one. The houses, which are usually, in my view, what gives you the feeling of density, it's where the houses go. The houses are identically located, but the site boundaries are in a more logical position in terms of land management and the existing character of that area or of that site.
So compare that to the earlier one we looked at. The constraining issue would be the driveway, wouldn't it?
It's a land ownership issue. In this one here, you could retain, I think, access over this, leave that driveway where it is. I'm not familiar with this one other than on plan view like this, but I would think you could retain that driveway by way of an easement over lot one. And you wouldn't have to create a new driveway, and the purchaser of lot one builds the house where they would normally have built. Yeah.
Okay. Have you done, and I don't think I've seen any, and I know Mr. Chibnall has got some figures there about additional lots on subdivision on different sizes. On this averaging one, though, have we got any figures to show how many additional lots would be created?
Well, technically, you're not achieving any more lots in a legal sense, because your average site size must remain at
the 5,000.
So you're not actually increasing the yield that the landholding generates. That's the critical factor. All you're doing is allowing the potential for a more rational approach in some instances. Now, there will be some landholdings, I would think, that you could simply do 5,000 square metre sites, give or take, or they might be 4,500 and a few are larger. But there'll be others where the better outcome might be to have a number of smaller sites at 3,000 and one or two larger landholdings, larger lots. It really is dependent on the characteristics of a site. But the key thing is that it doesn't increase the overall density or yield that the rules allow. 5,000 is still the average.
So the focus there really comes down to the impact on the rural character of the country living zone areas, doesn't it? Comes down to that, doesn't it? A more intensive.
Yes, I think
it gives the impression of more intensive development.
Well, if this averaging rule, the minimum rule came in, you're saying? Yeah. I don't believe it does. I know that Mr. Chibnall disagrees. I maintain that allowing sites at 3,000 in some instances and some larger sites may, in fact, go the other way. The view that people might get from, say, the public road could be primarily of larger sites with no houses on them, with a few smaller sites, perhaps in certain areas. They don't necessarily end up being clustered on the road. They might be down the hill a little bit. So you may, in fact, have the alternative aspect. You may have a view that or a feeling that the site is relatively low density. Whereas if you have a whole lot of 5,000 square metre sites, which I've heard described colloquially as cookie cutter, you actually could end up with a tapestry, just with a tapestry of squares. So I don't necessarily agree that you have a change in character, that's an adverse change or an adverse outcome against the policies.
Okay. I suppose, what do you say about the point that there is a distinction in the plan between the village zone minimum lot size. I think it's recommended to be 2,500.
Yeah.
And then you've got the country living zone, and under yours you'd have the averaging, which would be down to 3,000 square metres, and therefore there doesn't seem to be a lot of distinction between the two zones when that's not the purpose of the plan. What do you say about that argument?
Yes, and that's why I don't agree with having simply a minimum site area of 3,000 square metres in this zone. It's really important to maintain the average at 5. So that's the key difference. If it was 3,000, as I think one or two submitters were seeking, then you would be so close to being the village zone, you may as well just call it village zone. But in this case, you've got the ability to offset smaller sites with larger sites. And so the overall effect, if it's well planned especially, and well assessed by council under the restricted discretion process and the reference to the policies, can actually be a much better outcome than just having a whole lot of sites at 5,000 square metres, reaching the minimum.
Well,
if there is concern about having too many small sites and only one large one, and I don't think that will arise very often, but if there was concern about that, then it is possible to think about a rule which provides for some ratio, and that could be, and I'm not recommending it in this case. I don't believe that there seems to be that issue, but unless perhaps we're talking about the Hamilton City concern. But you could have, for example, a rule which says for every 2 sites under 5,000, you have to have one over 5,000, and that's a way of making sure you don't get, particularly on larger sites, you don't get too many sites at the 3,000 area, and perhaps 1 or 2 much larger sites. You can actually provide a ratio rule which gives you some overs and unders and puts a bit of a cap on how many of those can be done.
Have we any idea what are the largest sites, the number of largest sites around the country living zone where you could subdivide a number of lots out of the one ownership location? Do we got any idea? Are we talking? Do we have some areas within the country living zone which are, say, 10 hectares or what?
I can't answer that, I'm sorry, but possibly the Jim can assist you with that. I haven't done a detailed analysis of those site sizes.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I suppose it leads to question whether the averaging, what you propose, I suppose, and even, well, we've already got the 5,000, haven't we, under the operative plan, whether this is going to trigger a whole lot of subdivisions that are suddenly created, but that might be a little bit hypothetical. I'm not sure. Okay.
Well, I guess just a response to that, it does depend on what the objective is, and I've taken it to be that where there is a zoning applied, rural living zoning applied, then there's an expectation that that could yield the number of sites at 5,000 square metres across the board. Yeah. So that's a maximum yield. Now, there may be situations where site characteristics don't allow that. But I don't think that would be a starting point. I think the council would generally approach it with a numeric and say, divide these areas by 5,000. That's probably going to be our ultimate yield, and that's acceptable in terms of the other effects, traffic and all those related issues. So I don't think I'd suggest that I would be overly concerned about whether this may or may not having an averaging minimum rule would enable more development to occur. I think you're still dealing with the same ceiling, the same threshold. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Hartley and Mr. Fuller. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kearney. Mr. Fulton, actually, Ms. Kelly, I think we can go back to our regular screen now. I think it's a bit more, that's better.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hartley. Just on this averaging, and I just want to come back to a lot of the things that we see and examples that were given, and just that one that were given. It's always assumed that it's all just flat contoured land. The averaging that I'm going to refer to is a large amount around Tamahiri area, especially, and in Pocono and so on. There's a hell of a lot of land there that is very steep contoured, not even buildable, but it is an ownership. So what I'm saying is you could end up with a lot of land that is can be used to work out your average, but in an averaging sense, but it is not buildable or not of any value whatsoever to anybody else. So it's sort of a bit of a sneaky way of increasing yield. I agree with you, it's probably not going to make any more difference over total, but it's increasing the density of the smaller lots with the balance that is not available to be used anyway for anything else. Is that true?
It could be. I guess I'd have two parts to that answer. Would be, I question why the zoning should be applied to perhaps land that is so challenged physically, if that's the case. To my mind, if you're planning for rural living as a legitimate land use, then you would be applying it to areas that could be rationally subdivided to approximately the densities you're suggesting at 5,000. But we know that's not always the case, as you've highlighted. And so therefore the averaging minimum provision allows some rationalisation and response to those characteristics. And if you can achieve approximately the yield that that your numeric would suggest, 5,000 square metres into that area, that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. In part because you're providing for the land use people who want a rural lifestyle for a start, and secondly because you're therefore then taking pressure off having to zone new areas to provide for the demand. So you're maximising your yield of that rural living within those defined areas. But you're not increasing the density, you're still getting the 5,000 density.
Yeah, I agree, but I would imagine there could be a lot of people sitting and waiting on the land use changes later on in the plan, and they might be looking at their land and sort of thinking, well, if I can include all those gully areas, I can get quite a big yield coming out of the flat bits of land that I've got left. And I can see that this could become a problem. And I think that what you might see may be 3 or 4, and I know you did mention you may limit it, but 3 or 4 3,000 square metre blocks along a roadside, which would not really look like country living zone anymore.
Well, again, there are two parts to that in my view. One is you do have a restricted discretionary approach, so you can assess that, and if you're concerned about dwellings being aligned along a road, then that comes down to your assessment of amenity. And I think there are good policies, as I've outlined already in my statement, that talk about maintaining views and vistas, which should prevent that. It may happen in some situations, but I think against that, you've also got to say, well, you're also going to have larger areas of no development, where a rural valley doesn't have a whole lot of houses in it. So you do maintain some sort of rural character and the ability to have productive land uses and I won't call it economic farming, but perhaps productive activities. So again, I just, without wanting to repeat myself, I would, if there are that many holdings which are so challenged topographically, then I would probably start to question why they had the rural living zone applied. because the intent of the zoning is to actually enable that activity, not to apply it in a way that it can't actually be achieved.
Yeah, I suppose I'm basing some of my questioning on, I live in Timahiri, and there's a huge amount of very large gullies all through that area, and that's where I'm referring to. A lot of this is coming from. My own example is I live on a 1.1 hectare block of land, and we've only really got enough room for a house site. All the rest of it's in gullies. So what I'm saying is that averaging could apply to all the other land. No one else has access to it and can't even see it because it's in a very steep gully. But that's the sort of stuff I'm just trying to work through. Okay,
Yes,
thank you for your questions.
Yes, and just if I can just comment also that, it's not a concept that is alien or foreign to the plan. I mean, the plan does have provision for hamlets, and so to that extent, the council has already identified some value in having some form of clustering in certain circumstances. So it's a concept that is already in the plan. It doesn't mean that you will end up with a whole lot of 3,000 square metre sites clustered. They may in fact be reasonably scattered still. It's just that they won't necessarily be at 5,000. And I just sort of finish up and reiterate that if there was a real concern about that, then it is possible to have a rule which provides a ratio of smaller to larger sites, if that was a fallback you wanted to consider. Or it could be a rule like that which applies to sites over, let's say, if I pick a figure, 5 hectares. So if you have sites over 5 hectares, then you've got to have an over and under rule. If it's less than that, you may not need that. But that's a fallback position. I don't think it's necessary, but it's an opportunity that the council may wish to explore.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I'm finished. Thank you. Phil.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Tiaho, any questions from you?
No, I'm clear on what the submissions are about. Thank you.
Sure.
I've just got one, and it's for you, Mr. Hartley, and it's paragraph 1.12 of your summary statement. That you've said the addition of a rule requiring a consent notice to be applied, preventing the further subdivision of larger lots, of larger resulting sites to avoid rolling subdivision under the rules could be appropriate. How do you envisage that working?
Yes, it's simply the possibility may arise that if you do, of course, use an averaging minimum rule and you have, let's say, a balanced site of 1 hectare. What you don't want necessarily to maintain your average, of course, is somebody coming back who owns that 1 hectare lot and having another bite at the cherry and getting 2 5,000 square metre sites out of it. So to prevent that, you would need to, in my view, have a consent notice on that title, preventing a further subdivision application while the rural living zone still applied. And the rules remained unchanged.
How hard would it be to get that consent notice off in the event, you made mention previously of the possibility of these areas becoming more urbanised in the future?
Yes.
How would that work?
Well, I've seen actually 2 versions of those. One is simply a blank consent notice, and it simply says that no further subdivision of this lot can be proposed or undertaken unless the zoning of the land or the rules change to enable that to occur and you might even specify as a permitted or discretionary activity. So if the zoning changes, it goes to an urban zoning, that consent notice obviously becomes pointless, unnecessary or inapplicable. So that would work. I've seen those done quite often, and I think they're quite effective.
What, given the other zoning provisions that apply throughout the district, in particular the village zone, and I know there are submissions saying that the density should be increased generally, and you're not saying that. You're only saying that it should be averaged.
Correct.
But given that, isn't this zone meant to be, large lifestyle blocks, not sort of setting land aside for future urban development? I mean, the National Planning Standard requires the council to do that anyway. It's got, urban zoning, urban residential zoning, it's got village zoning. There's possibility of having deferred residential zonings, all those sorts of things. Isn't this just an opportunity for landowners to, essentially push the envelope as far as they can to benefit themselves as the parent lot holder with very little benefit for anybody else?
A good question. I guess I still come back to that starting point. As a planner, I would say that if I'm looking to provide a rural living lifestyle opportunity, and I apply a zone which allows an average density of 5,000 square metres, I would be firstly looking to apply that to land which is able to be developed generally to that density. And secondly, I would be concerned to make sure that the overall yield that I'm planning for is achievable. Because what I'm doing is providing for a lifestyle. There's no other purpose for it. And having an averaging provision enables that to occur with 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square metre sites, but averaging 5.
But taking Mr. Fulton's point a step further, and I take your point that if you zone land, it should be fit for the purpose for which it's being zoned. But it would appear that that's not necessarily the case for the country living zone at the moment, and that there are areas that are undevelopable. Would you think it was appropriate to include within the process that you're talking about some general provision to say that you can't really average down to a whole bunch of essentially 3,000 hectare developable sites, or in parking away the rubbishy stuff that you can't develop anyway? Would it be appropriate to have criteria, assuming we were to run with this proposal, that actually prevented you from doing that, and actually that there had to be a test or a consent requirement to say the area subject to the averaging rule must be on a slope of less than something or other, or some other geotechnical criterion that says it's got to be real, not imaginary?
That's certainly a possibility. If the panel was concerned about that, yes.
Okay. Well, that's food for thought.
Yes, the response, I guess, would be to say, I mean, generally my experience is that the larger the site areas get, the more difficult many people find to manage them. And when you're getting down to 5,000 square metres anyway, it's not a farm, it's barely even a lifestyle farm in a farming sense. You might be talking chickens and a couple of sheep. So in reality, I don't find that the difference between 3,000 and 5,000 square metres is make or break in what you do with the land. It may be a big garden or a big landscaped area. So the ability to average out at 5, but have some smaller and some larger, if anything, is going to enable some of the large ones to be farmed in a slightly more, I'll call it productive. I won't call it economic, but a productive sense.
Oh, no, thank you. That's
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
There is also that possibility of, I mentioned, of an over and under rule or rules as well. If you want to create a ratio and make sure there aren't too many under 5, you might have a rule which says, as I mentioned, for every 2 sites under 5, you've got to have 1 over, and that will provide some sort of scale and create some ratio.
All right, no, that's helpful. I suppose the only thing I'd say in response to that, I don't envisage us going away and trying to recraft averaging rules or excluding certain sorts of land or having a a minimum number or maximum number of undersized lots, any of that sort of stuff. It's just we're just not inclined to do it in the first place. And second of all, we'd be almost certain to please nobody in what we came up with. So I think that what we would say that if you're proposing to advance that any further, not that we're wanting to have, to prolong the hearing, I think we'd be amenable to you providing some details of how that scheme might work, so that we've then got the opportunity to say yay or nay to it, as opposed to getting slide rules ourselves out and maps and stuff.
Yeah, I understand. Yes,
We're
yes.
certainly not inclined to do that. I don't know what the rest of the panel think about that as a suggestion.
I don't have any problem with it. You can put it in writing, and it doesn't need another hearing or anything like that.
No, it doesn't.
It's just, no, it just.
And
it's just,
I don't think that's I mean, it's up to you whether you do it. We're not going to require you to do it, because that would be perhaps sending you the signal that we're attracted to the proposition. We aren't attracted to it one way or the other. We're simply saying that you've proposed a bunch of scenarios, but we're not inclined to investigate ourselves. But if you think it would help us in our deliberations, then you should you should provide that to us.
Yes, no, in fact, since I read the rebuttal, I did draft a rough rule, but it wouldn't be too difficult to develop that along the lines of the questions you've asked me. So if that was an opportunity, I think Mr. Fuller and I would be able to submit that to you pretty quickly.
All right, well, let's say by the end of the week. How does that sound?
I think that sounds fine to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going anywhere for it, so that's easily done.
I don't think any of us are, unfortunately.
Just one point, Mr. Chair, as part of the discussion we had earlier with Mr. Hartley, you mentioned about covenants on preventing further subdivision on a larger balanced lot. Why would you do that if the country living zone permitted the creation of further lots of 5,000 square meters, for example? Why would
yes, I'll give you an example that because you can have sites of 5,000, if you do an averaging subdivision, and you, for example, have I think I mentioned a 1 hectare balance lot, and you've created you've created 2 or 3,000 square metre sites, then the owner of that 1 hectare lot could arguably come back 6 months later, after all the titles are issued, and propose a 2-lot subdivision at 5,000 each. And if you didn't have, certainly the council could, in the consent process, could say, well, this is a subversion of the rules because you've already taken your 2 or 3,000s off. But that may or may not happen depending on who's in the seat on that day. So if you put a consent notice preventing further subdivision of that lot until such time as the plan rules enable it, or the zoning enables it, then that would just prevent any application being made.
Okay.
And in fact, I have seen a consent notice. It was applied in the Rodney area, Dairy Flat, some years ago, where it prevented an applicant or a landowner even making an application for subdivision. And the only way you can proceed from that point is to apply to the council for the removal or modification of that consent notice.
Yeah, there's been some case law on that. But, okay,
yes, there has.
Thank you.
And in fact, I can say that the Environment Court has recently applied a similar consent notice requirement to land north of Warkworth, which may go into urban development in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
So I could provide you an example, or Mr. Fuller could provide you an example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Mr. Fuller. Mr. Fuller, is there anything you need to remind us of before we let you go?
Just maybe one point in terms of the general approach, I think from a high level policy perspective on lifestyle opportunities, In my submission, the council has quite rightly recognised that there is a demand for this style of living, and really we're talking about how best to try and manage that at the sort of site-specific level. But in terms of someone wanting a lifestyle and even the idea that, you know, in some ways it should be limited, people aren't obviously restricted to a lifestyle block. I mean, you don't really want people buying 10 hectares of productive land and then grazing a horse on it. People with money can afford that sort of opportunity. So I suppose it is this balance between recognising that demand with this zone. As Mr. Hartley has suggested, it's no point in having the zone there and not being able to create lots on it. So it is trying to get that balance right, and I think the plan generally has achieved that. So it's really just this averaging idea as a bit of a nuanced approach, I think, which could be of benefit. But thank the and I'm not sure if you're going to have feedback on the process, but well done from our perspective. I don't know about Mr. Hartley, but it's been a good hearing, so thanks for that.
That's fine. If we may well seek some feedback from folk on the Zoom idea. It seems to us to work pretty well. I think we've been able to understand very clearly what folk have said. We've seen stuff on the screen where we need to refer to it. And yeah, I think it's from our point of view, it seems to be working quite well, but we might well seek some feedback from parties in the fullness of time. But thank you very much for your submission. You're welcome to stay, obviously, but you're also welcome to leave. That's entirely up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, our next submitter is Mr. Crisp in his private capacity. As I've mentioned before, I think his sound may have been off. He's obviously a business partner of mine. So I've already declared that conflict in our register of interest. So I'm going to A, mute myself, and B, turn my video off for now, and I'll leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Cooney, and I'll see.
Okay, he's gone. Pretty quick. Okay, Mr. Crisp. Thank you for your evidence. The ball's in your court on how you wish to present it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooney. Ms. Kelly, are we able to put up my PowerPoint, please? So I've got about 20 slides, which I'll run through fairly quickly. If we just go to the first one, please, Sandra. So just before I sort of focus on that, there's really two main ways in which what has historically been referred to as rural residential development, which is essentially just a residential activity on a larger lot in the rural environment, wherein there is the ability to develop rural lots. It's really been constrained in the past by the ability to dispose of sewage by way of a septic tank and a drainage field. And there's two ways in which councils have typically approached this. Either you allow it generally across the rural environment and have subdivision rules within the rural zone that provide for some form of rural residential development, or you provide specific zones which provide for those activities in a defined area. Now, the Waikato district has historically adopted both approaches over time, and as have many other districts, and more recently, particularly as a result of Future Proof, it's focused on the latter, which is to basically have identified zones where you provide for these types of living environments, and that then has the benefit of freeing up the balance of the rural zone for genuine rural activities, and that helps minimise reverse sensitivity issues and things like that, and maintains rural land for productive purposes. So in my highlights package, I've got just 3 slides which have got words on it, and the rest are pictures, which I'll talk you through. So in terms of the first one, it's just setting out the relief sought in my submission, which is that rather than a 5,000 square metre minimum lot size, that I'm seeking a 3,000 minimum lot size. Sandra, can we go to the next slide, please? The next 2 slides are essentially just the key points in my submission of my evidence, and that is that it will result in a much more efficient utilisation of the finite land resource, which is consistent in accordance with Section 7B of the RMA compared with the status quo. It'll reduce pressure on additional areas of productive rural zone land being used for large lot residential purposes in the future. And it'll also still be consistent with the objectives and policies relating to the country living zone. And just on that point there, the rebuttal evidence from Ms. Chibnall disagrees with that point. My view is that 3,000 square metres is still a very large piece of land for essentially a residential purpose. You'll still have a very large area of lawn around it, and it'll still have that open character that you're getting at present with larger lots. It'll be a much more efficient utilisation of land. And I can come back to you if you want to question me on that. Can we please go to the next slide? So this next point is really responding to the issues raised by Hamilton City and others, in that it'll result in little or no adverse effect on infrastructure demand for services within the zone or elsewhere that cannot be foreseen, planned for, and resolved in a timely manner. And just on that point, there are concerns, for example, raised about water supply. Well, if there is an increased need for water supply as a consequence of what I'm proposing, that is something that can be foreseen. It's not, the development's not going to occur overnight. It'll occur as it has in the past over a very long period of time, and it can be separately charged for. At present, we pay separate rates in the Waikato district for water, and if those rates need to increase to provide a better or more extensive water supply, then that can be dealt with by way of a combination of development contributions and rates. And that's the main one. Nothing will change in terms of sewage disposal, because the lot size I've chosen is in excess of the minimum lot size required by the Regional Council for sewage disposal. And the roads are already there or would be put in by developers as additional areas are opened up. The next point is it'll enable the creation of additional lots, mostly in the greenfields part of the country living zone, over a period of many years in line with market demand. So it's not going to change what's already happened. It's not going to alter the character very much at all. And as I'll explain in my evidence, I have explained in my evidence and with the photos that I'll use, that because a lot of houses are located in the middle of that 5,000 existing lot, the reality is that they won't be able to be further subdivided. So the numbers I've got in my evidence, and I can provide you the spreadsheet that falls in behind that if you like, they are a theoretical maximum rather than what can actually occur. They're just based on land areas. And finally, my last point there is that my view is that the 3,000 square metre minimum lot size will be the most appropriate way to achieve the relevant objectives of the plan and the purpose and principles of the Act. So that's the end of the words. Now we can go to the fun bit, which is to look through the photos. So this first slide here is Davern Estate on Redwood Grove. And firstly, I should just say that a lot of my photograph examples are concentrated on the Tamahiri area, and because I've only been able to walk around in the last couple of weeks taking these photos, I would have had examples further afield. But looking at Google Maps, you'll be able to see that the sort of conclusions I'm reaching are fairly consistent across most of the country living zone areas. Now, to the best of my knowledge, all of the properties I'm going to show you are less than 10,000 square metres and therefore cannot be further subdivided under the current rules of the plan. And most of what I'm going to show you is focusing on the character of the country living zone, where it has been developed in accordance with the current subdivision rules, and how a more efficient utilisation of land can be achieved in a manner that is consistent with the objectives and policies of the plan. So just to start out, the 42A report insists that the country living zone has a rural character. So if we, and there are some larger lots that are still there, but to the extent that any genuine rural activities can be found in the zone, those activities are occurring on properties that have yet to be subdivided and developed for large lot residential purposes. And once the latter occurs, any vestige of rural character just largely disappears. And that's what I'll show you in a lot of these photos. So here's the first example. This is a gated community Davern Estate on Redwood Grove. So you can see the wall along the front, the nice smooth hot mix road and the sealed driveway. If you look inside the gates there, there's fences that come up sort of about halfway up your thigh. There's not a stock unit in sight. There's very large houses, and there's nothing of that you would describe as sort of rural in character. I described in my evidence, I referred to Tamahere as more the sort of Beverley Flats of Hamilton, and if you compare that with what's, Beverly Hills in California, if any of you have been there, where they have much larger lots than 5,000 square metres, but there's no way you would describe that as being rural in character. Can we go to the next slide, please, Sandra? So this is Parklea Estate on Parklea Drive. So the sort of things you can observe there, again, is the nice, smooth, hot mix sealed road, the 50k speed environment, the footpath, low fences, and there's not a stock unit or any other rural activity in sight. It's just large lot residential. If we go to the next slide, please. This is moving just further down the road, and again you can see the low fences, the large lawns, and I don't think you can, but if you did zoom in, if you look at that footpath beyond the first driveway, you'll see a beautifully manicured edges, which is not, this is what you're looking at there is not what I would describe as a typically rural environment. It's more a very beautiful street of a residential character. If we go to the next slide.
It is an open space character though, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's absolutely right. But I don't think that if those lots were 3,000 square metres, that would materially change in terms of what you see. I'll carry on. I've got some examples. I've got some various. Okay, so here's the. This is just what we were looking at. One of the properties we were looking at before in the previous slide. So my sort of thesis is that once that, and just driving around these zones, you'll see that once they've been subdivided and developed in accordance with the current rules, they basically become ride-on lawnmowerville. Or increasingly, the Husqvarna robot is the which you can see here is the new form of stock unit, and this is and this is presumably because people have got sick of the time it takes to mow the lawns on a 5,000 square metre property. So we go to the next slide. I'll come back to that. So this is the Hart Road area, which has been a bit of a planning disaster for a whole range of reasons, which I won't necessarily go into at the moment, because they're not really relevant for current purposes. But if you look at that aerial photograph there from Google Maps, which is actually quite a bit out of date, one thing you sort of observe is that basically large houses on very large properties, not a stock unit in sight. There's nothing that you can see in there that is rural in terms of any of the activities you can observe. So we can go to the next slide, please, Sandra. So there's Hart Road from ground level. And what you see is basically a housing estate of just very large houses. You've got nice smooth roads, you've got a footpath, in the bottom corner there you can see a water supply and ultra-fast broadband connection. And the only vestige of ruralness that you can see there is the job lot of letterboxes that have been obtained from RD1 or Wrightsons, just in the foreground there. Now moving to the next photo, please, Sandra. So this is 27 Hart Road. So that's just a typical example of what's on that street. You've got a large house, which in this case is actually located fairly within the middle of the property, and there's the massive expanse of front lawn, and low fences, not a rural activity in sight. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is 25. This is next door. So again, where someone's given up on the dream and selling up. And again, you can see the totally unproductive use of that land. That property there is over 8,000 square metres, but under 10,000 and therefore can't be subdivided further. Go to the next slide, please, Sandra. This is my cousin's property on Poplar Lane. And to me, this is the poster child for what is not a sustainable use of the natural land resource. This is just a massive lawn area that's mown with a ride-on lawnmower, and is just a totally unproductive use of the land. Go to the next slide, please, Sandra. This is the immediately adjoining property next door, which is just another example of the same situation, but I've highlighted there another one of the modern day stock units there, the old Husqvarna robot cruising around the lawn. Next slide, please. So now this is a little bit further south from from the last aerial photograph. So this is the sort of Newell Road, Riverglade area. Now, Sandra, are you able to put your cursor over on the left-hand side of the picture? Go up a wee bit, up to where that netting is to the left, up there. Yeah, so that property has, this is just to point out how this is a little bit out of date. That property has now been subdivided into 5 lots. If you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, that open space there, that area is being developed right at the moment as a subdivision. If you go across the road to the left, please, Sandra, that property has been subdivided into 3 lots surrounding that existing house and tennis court and swimming pool there.
And what are they, 5,000 square metres each?
Yes, that's right, yep. And if you go up, Sandra, please, to just immediately above where it says Riverglade Drive beside Newell Road, that vacant property up there. That property there is 8,111 square metres, cannot be subdivided. Now, if you imagine the house that's in the property right next door to it and plonk that on that property, you can see how much lawn you'll have around that house. Even if you put a swimming pool and a shed and all sorts of other stuff, you can see how much curtilage you have. Whereas my proposal would enable that property to be subdivided in half, no more. And they would still be very big properties. Sandra, if you could please go down to where the left-hand Riverglade Drive label is, immediately south of there is a property with a swimming pool. Next one down, that one. That's my property. And my property is an example where, despite it being 6,145 square metres, and therefore theoretically subdividable under what I'm proposing, the reality of it is it couldn't be. It would be totally uneconomic to do it. The house is plonked smack in the middle of the property, and there's just no way that you could economically subdivide that property under the rule that I'm proposing. And that's the case for many of the properties. If you look immediately across the north side of Riverglade Drive there, those 2 properties there, another examples, and the same with the properties that are being developed to the left of there as well. They're just the way they've been developed, they won't be able to be further subdivided. So the numbers I've presented and the graph that I've presented are very much theoretical maximums. Can we go to the next slide, please, Sandra? So that's that property on the corner, very large area of land, over 8,000 square metres. It's not used for any rural purposes. It doesn't even have a gate, as you can see there, and it's just periodically mown. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the northern half of my property, and what you're looking at there is roughly 1/3 of the lawn area that surrounds my house. It takes at least 1.5 hours to mow the lawn with a ride-on lawnmower that's about 3 times the cut width of a standard push mower. And it's lucky that I like mowing lawns, so I don't have a problem with that. But it does give me a lot of time to think in an uninterrupted manner. And I do think a lot when I'm on that lawnmower about what an absolute waste of land this is. Whereas everything I could possibly want to do in terms of having that sort of lifestyle and what everyone else does, sort of looking around the neighbourhood, you could easily do it on 3,000 square metres and still comply with all the setbacks, all the lot ratios in terms of coverage, and you still have plenty of space around you, and be a much more efficient use of land. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is a property on Newell Road. It's just an example where the house you can see on the left is a secondary dwelling, and then just you can see tucked in behind it is the primary dwelling. Even on a property like that, where you've got 2 houses on it already, you've still got this massive area of lawn, which is totally unproductive, and you know, not used for anything in terms of rural activities. Next slide, please. Just
How many
about there.
slides have you got to go, Mr. Chris? Because I'm just conscious of the
Only 2.
time.
I think there's only
Okay.
2 to go, sir. And this is an example where someone has put their house on one half of the property. This is on the corner of Birchwood and Newell Road. The same has occurred. The property you can see in the background there, they've done the same thing as well. But the end result is that basically they've got a very large area of lawn, and that's it. And it's just results in an unproductive use of land compared to what I'm proposing. And then I think finally, oh yes, if you go to the last, I think there's one more slide. Yep. And this is the Birchwood Lane area, which has been a focus of quite an increased amount of development in recent years. And what you see here is basically more of the same. The house in the middle of 5,000 plus square metre section, very large areas of lawn, low fences, not a stocked unit or any other form of rural activity in sight, footpaths. This is not a rural environment. This is a large lot residential, and I guess my what I'm seeking is that be a far more efficiently developed type of environment, which will still provide everyone the opportunity to do everything they are currently able to do, but in a much more land efficient manner. That's it, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Yahoo, have you got any questions there? Can you, Sandra, could you just take that down from the screen at the moment? Thank you.
Yeah, just a question about your use of the word unproductive. So just because land isn't being grazed by cows or growing food, does that necessarily mean that it's unproductive?
I fully agree that the use of
wasted, it's being wasted, and yeah, because I just think the amenity, the fact that there's space, the fact that if you've got a family, they can run around and do lots of other things that they wouldn't be able to do in a strictly urban area. That might be for some people who purchase those properties to have that kind of space and amenity. That might be a productive use of the whenua.
Yeah, the use of a property for a house, I accept entirely, is a productive use of land, and the activities that go along with that in terms of sheds and recreational activities. But my point there is that what I'm proposing is not going to suddenly result in all of those existing 5,000 plus square metre lots being further subdivided. As I've pointed out, many of them won't be able to be. What it'll do is create a range of opportunities in the market so that you'll still have lots that are 5,000 square metres or larger, but you will also have ones that are smaller. And there's still, if you look at a 3,000 square metre lot, as I pointed out in my evidence, there's still ample room to have the kids running around for miles on a 3,000 square metre lot.
Yeah, I guess the point I'm making is if I was a person who expended an extraordinary amount of money to be living in one of the very few country living zones, I don't know that I'd be particularly happy about kind of more development in an area where I thought that was going to, the whole purpose of purchasing in a country living zone was to not be in those higher built up areas. And so I just guess it's a mindset about how the way in which we use language of unproductive or, an unproductive use of land.
Yeah, as I say, it'll mostly be focused on new areas that are opened up. Nothing's changing in terms of the setbacks or bulk and location requirements. So you're still going to have the same separation between dwellings and other buildings between properties. So there's no greater proximity of a neighbour to you as a consequence of this. It might mean that in a particular subdivision, you might have one more neighbour adjoining you than would otherwise be the case. But anyone who's buying into those new subdivisions are buying with their eyes wide open and seeing what they're getting.
I don't
have any other questions, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Fulton, is he there?
Excuse me, Paul, we've lost Dines for some
Yeah.
reason. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll still move on then.
Okay,
If you can see if you can get him back, Sandra.
sure.
Mr. Crisp, if you're advocating 3,000, why not 2,000? That's still a large area. You know, I'm sort of saying, well, where do you draw the line? 2,000 to me is still a larger type area. So, and you say, well, 3,000. So, you know, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I did actually address that in my evidence, where I supported the conclusions reached by Ms. Chibnall that anything below at least 2,500 is really not feasible because of a single constraint, which is that these areas will remain unsewered, and therefore you need to have a minimum lot size that is consistent with the regional council requirement for a septic tank and a drainage field, and that minimum lot size is 2,500 square metres. So therefore, I say you can't have 2,000. You could have 2,500, but what I have purposely done is said, well, two things. One is let's have a margin for error in terms of that 2,500, because it is a minimum. So 3,000 provides you a level of comfort in terms of the adequacy of the ability to dispose of sewage, and any subdivision still has to have a geotech report and confirm that that's able to occur. And secondly, that if you went for 2,500, that means that every existing lot could theoretically be subdivided. Whereas the reality is that most of those existing lots that have been created are somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 typically, because people have tried to get the most number of lots out of a subdivision. So the opportunity that I'm proposing you create really relates to land which is yet to be subdivided and developed. So it's the larger reservoir of existing lots, or it's where there are existing lots that are 6,000 square meters or over, that could be then potentially subdivided. And as I said, that's only a theoretical maximum because many of the lots won't be able to be subdivided economically.
You showed a number of photographs and examples of country living places around mainly Tamahere.
Yeah.
But when you look at those, they're generally reasonably consistent with policy 5.6.2, which actually says that within the country living zone, you maintain the open space character, and you maintain low density residential development. Going down to 3,000, isn't that inconsistent with that policy?
No, I disagree, because 3,000 square meters is still a very large lot. If you can compare it to an urban environment, so if we take, for example, in Cambridge, now if you take a 3,000 square meter, I'm just using my calculator here, and divide that by 400, which is the minimum lot size in Cambridge. Hang on, that didn't work. What did I say? 3,000 divided by 400. That's 7.5 lots. So what I'm proposing is 7.5 times bigger than what is now the new urban lot size. And if you take a 500 square meter lot size, then it's was it 6 times? it's still 6 times bigger than an average urban lot. So there's nothing low or small density about that. It's still going to have a very open character about it. Yeah.
But you were critical of, well, it seemed to give me the impression you were critical of those lots being created the way they are, and yet they're perfectly consistent with policy 5.6.2, aren't they?
Well, you can say that they are consistent with that policy, but I guess the question is a lot of between 3,000 and 5,000 also consistent with that policy? And I would say that is the case.
All right. Okay. Okay. I've finished my questions. Mr. Fulton, have you got some questions?
Just a few. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chris. I think a lot of the examples you've given, and especially in Poplar Lane and so on, they were the very early developments of the country living zone in the Waikato district. And my understanding that those were largely developed as 8,000 square metre sections, not 5. And I do remember a plan change that allowed, there used to be an averaging of 8, and now they come down to 5. What you're suggesting of 3,000, and just thinking forward into the district, there'll be large applications for country living zones. I would be expecting to come forward in the later hearings with the land use changes. You could find a whole country living zone as 3,000 square metres. And is that what we would then change what country living is from 5 or Tamahiri's vision down to a 3,000 square metre? Is that something you'd thought about, a whole new subdivision of just one size? I mean, retrofitting what is already in Tamahiri now, because it was a very early development, is difficult, and I take all your points on that. But that would be the consequences of someone else doing a country living zone now. Wouldn't want to go beyond, and you'd have a whole 3,000 square metre zone. Would that be right?
Okay, so two parts to that question. Firstly, in terms of the Poplar Lane example, where you're talking about where those lots are mostly about 8,000 square metres, what my proposal does, it enables them to be cut in half, those lots. So those big lawns that I showed you at the back of those properties, you could then create one additional lot. They would have to be 9,000 or more for there to be any further subdivision beyond one additional lot. But when you look at those areas, they're massive. You're absolutely right. They were created as very large lots. But if those properties were subdivided, I don't think, you're not going to see anything different from the road. You're not going to see anything different in terms of character. You're just going to have a more efficient utilisation of land. In terms of the second part of your question, sir, about if you had a new subdivision, yes, that could potentially be all of 3,000 square metres, and if that's what, and they will only sell if that's what the market demands. So what you're ending up with is a variety of opportunities throughout the country living zone as a consequence of the historical pattern of subdivision, where there will be some opportunity for properties like those Poplar Lane examples to further subdivide. But the majority of what you'll find in terms of the 3,000 square metre lots will be new subdivisions in areas that have yet to be developed at all. And if that's what the market wants, then that's what the market will buy. And then you say, well, what's the downside of that? If it's a more efficient utilisation of land, it uses our finite land resource more efficiently. It reduces the need to expand country living zones in the future and gobble up more high quality soils. That, from a planning perspective, to me, seems like a good outcome.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mr. Crisp, for your presentation there. We'll go away and think about what you've submitted on, because it's one of the main issues that come up in this topic as to what should be the minimum lot sizes. So thank you very much. Just by the way, what's your view of how this system is working?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. I think this is really, really a good and efficient way of doing it. And in some ways, it's sort of like the fact that we can see everyone on the screen, it's in some ways it's easier than actually going to a hearing in the same room. I think it's fantastic, and I'd commend you to carry on doing it this way.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Crisp. Thank
Okay, thank you.
you. Mr. Mitchell, is he back on? Yes, he is.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back. Who
Yep.
was it that said that? Chucky, I think, in the one of those horror movies. But anyway, I'm back anyway.
General MacArthur said that.
Oh, did he? Oh, I'll pretend to be him then. Thanks for that. Our next submitter's Mr. Finlay.
Yeah, hi everyone. Can you hear me all right? And see
Yes,
me?
we can, thank you. We've got your evidence on our system, so you just fire away in whatever way suits you best.
Yeah, I guess probably the key part of that is there's an aerial PDF with an aerial image with some markups. It's probably the key thing to be able to talk to if you've got that.
I've got it on my second screen here, but maybe if Ms. Kelly can share that.
Yeah, I suppose I guess open. I'm really speaking to my submission 418 and further submission 1311, which I've sort of outlined in my evidence. And I guess once we have that aerial image, are you going to share that? Are you? So, probably worth waiting for that.
Just carry on, Ethan. I'll just give me a few minutes to dig it out.
Okay, no
Thank
worries.
you.
Alternatively, I could share it, but that's right. So I guess we're in the unique scenario where we're a landowner in, I guess, closer to the Matangi Village area. I don't know if you're familiar with Taplin Road, but there's a significant area we're rural zoned currently, but down Taplin Road, you might be aware of subdivisions of recent near the Fine Lawn area. So in the aerial image, that sort of, you can see that outline between the main railway that leads to Hautapu and the high tension pylons. On the left of the page, there is a number of, I guess, small lot rural sections that really, I guess, fit more into the country living definition. I guess following on some of the remarks Mark Chris made, there is very little use for livestock or anything to do with that, but it does provide the amenity that I guess the district plan is trying to, in a rural feel. Now, I guess the thing where we're stuck, or at least wanting to, I guess, unleash potential for our land is, you can see in the green, I don't know if you're able to rotate the page with Control-Shift+ there, Sandra.
Just for the panel's benefit, if you click on the view options at the top, you can actually have a split screen showing the pictures of the people and what's on the screen, and you can move the margin to make each one bigger or smaller. So if you still want to see Mr. Finlay and his picture, you can press that view options and select side by side mode.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So I suppose just, yeah, what I was really getting to there is that the lot that we own is in green there, down sort of the bottom right of the page. And so that's a 2.4 hectare lot within the rural zone, which is the same zone for all these houses. And I guess the key part is there's no real provision that allows us the ability to better utilise or subdivide that land in the proposed plan. Both in the rural zoning, it becomes a prohibited activity to subdivide. So I guess that forms part of the evidence I've put forward, where I'm sort of seeking that the land within the blue highlighted zone really does fit the country living objectives really. And I guess one approach would be to extend the country living zone to include what is already country living, not talking about creating new subdivisions or expanding on. It's really defining what is already there as to what it is. because I wouldn't really describe those houses as rural. I think they fit more country living. But we can discuss that. So I suppose really the objective of why I'm here today is the district plan at the moment doesn't really provide for any provision to utilise our land other than as a 6 acre or 2.4 hectare block, which I suppose you could argue you could farm it. But I think a number of people have touched on the ability to farm that. Sure, as a lifestyle, but I don't think it's really sustainable economically. So we're really seeking to be able to use that land still in a rural setting that fits with the country living, but create some further amenity and opportunities for others. The other aspect of the evidence in my submissions is around the lot sizes. Been touched on. Probably I could I share a view with those who spoke earlier, Peter and Shane's commentary around averaging. I think it could be used fairly successfully. There were some concerns there. I guess I wouldn't expect the number of 8,000 square metre blocks to be a large amount within the existing country living. But I suppose there were a couple of other things raised around, say you have a large gully but a small building platform, as it were, and everyone taking a slice of that to be able to create a number of smaller lots. I guess one of the things that occurred during this conversation was that you could require a minimum building platform, and I'm pretty sure that's well defined within the district plan already. And also, we seem to have for additional dwellings, or now to be called independent persons dwellings, or additional dwellings, sorry. We have proximity rules around how close that the property needs to be, the house needs to be. My thoughts would be that you could achieve some similar rulings around proximity of houses within a setting of smaller lots if they were to be created to maintain that sense of space. Don't know if there's any questions at this point, but I suppose the crux of my point here is we aren't really asking to break up more land. I know there's a desire to sort of sustain rural large lots in terms of farming blocks and that, but I feel that we fit within a sort of a minor category that includes not that many other houses I've seen similar to our situation, but I guess, yeah, we could effectively subdivide further with minimal impact on the neighbours. There's already reverse sensitivities, I guess issues around reverse sensitivities have already been resolved or don't exist. I think I touch on in my evidence that there's been no evidence put forward to suggest that there are issues with reverse sensitivities in this region. So I don't see that being an issue. For example, the property to the north of the green highlighted, the submitter's lot, I don't think that you could, well, I wouldn't see an argument that the landowner there would notice a fourth property on his boundary, which is probably the most you would see compared to the 4 he already had, or 3 he already has. So I don't see an escalation there. That probably covers, I'll just sort of go over some of my points, sorry, just to make sure I've covered what. I suppose just on the smaller lots, there was a comment, I think, made, I can't remember who made it earlier, but they were concerned about ad hoc developments coming out of smaller lot allowance, allowing smaller lots. I think there's been a number of ways, especially those raised by Shane and Peter Fuller this morning, about how that could be managed, and that's something I'd like to see explored. That there is the ability to have smaller lots. I think you can end up in scenarios where the land form leads to waste, or you could better optimize it. It's maybe a better way of putting it. But in our instance, we are relatively flat land, well, very flat land, and you can utilize basically to the edges quite effectively. We're not talking about any gullies or something like that. So yeah, I guess
Right.
I'd just like to see the plan respond to some of the needs that people have, and I guess over time it has to do this, and we've seen it do it on Taplin Road with that large lot of group of houses being put in there, but that's probably been done in a way that maybe wasn't very well controlled. I don't know how that process quite played out, but I guess it's dealing with the effects of the changes and how we could go forward.
All right, thank you, Mr. Finlay. Can I just check what the address of that property is? I'm just been trying to look at it on Google Maps, and I'm struggling to reconcile this plan with
Yeah, sure.
with a property address.
So it's Lennox Lane, 7B. So Lennox is spelled Lennoc. It's Connell backwards.
Okay, well, I'll have a look at that later. I think the point, I don't think we're going to have too many questions of you, simply being that this hearing is about the provisions of the zoning and rezoning matters, which is what you're raising, is something that we're going to be addressing at a subsequent hearing.
Okay.
So just so that you're aware of that, I mean, the information you've provided us is clear enough on that aspect. But I think with that as a background, we're probably not going to have a whole lot of questions from you about the specifics of your property at the minute, but let's just see if we do have any questions anyway. Mr. Yahoo, do you have any questions? Mr. Fulton?
No, I haven't got any questions. I'm familiar with your Taplin Road and the other subdivisions that happened down there. They were all boundary relocations and put it all in one block. So, but however, no questions at this stage. I think it's a matter of rezoning land issue.
Thanks, Mr. Fulton. Mr. Cooney, anything from you?
No. We'll deal with that, the main issue, later on. But thank you.
Yeah, and I don't have any questions either for the reasons that I've said, and your submission's clear. So thank you very much for it. And hopefully this has been reasonably user-friendly using this system for your participation.
Yeah, I would say I haven't had to venture from work to Narrowaya, but I'm working from home, so yeah.
Very good.
But appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our last customer before lunchtime is Mr. Howarth, please.
Good afternoon. How is the panel today?
Good.
Very good, thank you.
Excellent. I endeavoured to not take too long because, as you said, it is just before lunch, and I understand I don't want to keep commissioners away from their sandwiches.
No, you don't have to worry about that. That's our problem, not yours. You do what you need to do to present your information to us.
So yes, as mentioned, I'm Jason Howarth, and I'm a long-time Tamihere resident. My family and I have been in Newells Road for around 30 years. I hold my commercial pilot's licence. I gained my licence in 2008, and I've previously been a flight instructor based at Hamilton Airport, and have previously been a baggage handler at Hamilton Airport during my training years. I also hold a Bachelor in Social Sciences, a major in Political Science, and until recently was the former Principal Advisor to the Hamilton Mayor, Andrew King. Now, I'll take most of my submissions largely as read, and happy to take questions on them throughout. However, to be very clear, what my submission is the removal of the 1.1 hectare provision and essentially relating to the airport subdivision control boundary. I don't believe there's a need for it, and both my initial submission 7.1 and the evidence provided for this hearing sort of consolidate that. I do want to actually bring, having read the rebuttal evidence both from the 142A report and also the rebuttal evidence provided by the airport, I do want to draw particular attention to paragraph 146 of the rebuttal report from Ms. Chibnall, in a particular paragraph that the purpose of additional controls on subdivision in the area is to limit the number of people and land use subjects to adverse noise effects from the aircraft. While except the aircraft are not constrained to flying within the delineated area on the district plan maps, I consider the concept of the airport subdivision control boundary is sound planning response to minimise the potential of earth sensitivity effects to arise in the area where the highest levels of aircraft noise are likely to be experienced. Now, I do want to provide a bit of commentary on that, and largely that, given that the operation of the airport has significantly changed since 2010, which the last review was done, and that was 10 years ago. I think there's no weight can be given to of relevancy to today's environment. The airport has lost its international status. There's no international servicing capacity. There's no jet operations. And I really think when the panel needs to address the question is there a current adverse noise effect being generated from the aircraft in the area? And I would suggest there's not. And ignoring obviously the immediate situation with travel and the effects that it may have on the airport, I don't think there's a current adverse noise effect generated by aircraft. I also draw a little bit of a criticism to there seems to be two conflicting comments within that paragraph. You can't have a sound planning response as well as having knowledge that there's aircraft movements occurring outside that area. The planning response and the establishment of the current boundary, I think, is a failure. And I can count 20 different properties that have been established outside that subdivision control boundary where aircraft fly directly over the property but are not subject to the same conditions. And I think an appropriate planning response failed the moment the decision was made to narrow that corridor, as the true aircraft operation hasn't actually been factored in. Also want to jump a little bit down to paragraph 149 of the council responses. It sort of takes a snapshot of the airport's rebuttal to it as well, and discussing points A to F essentially. And I'll just touch on point D very quickly. As I say, it's airport operations are not constrained by the airport subdivision control boundary, which sort of really supports my comments that how can you have an appropriate response if you know that these activities are occurring outside of that. And I'm choosing for this next part because points A and E I'll take together as a form of commentary. And I'm going to get a little bit aviation nerd out here a little bit in terms of aircraft usage. So I acknowledge that when that modelling was done some time ago, that it had many different types, not just flight paths, which I mentioned in my original in my submission, but it also mentions the type of aircraft. So as we said, there's no longer jet operations occurring at Hamilton. Neither the A320 operated by Air New Zealand or the 737 operated by Pacific Blue operate. As also mentioned, the Beech, the smaller of the Air New Zealand aircraft, have been retired from service, and subsequently their maintenance base was closed. And Air New Zealand are the only operators to operate the ATR 600 and the Dash 8 Q300 regional turboprop, which have a passenger capacity of 68 and 53 pax respective. The noise characteristics can be very broad. Jets are significantly louder than turboprops, yet as mentioned, they're no longer operational. The Beech, being the smaller aircraft which is retired, wouldn't have a significant effect. The ATR 600, which is currently operational, has significant upgrades to reduce its noise sound print compared to its predecessor, the ATR 500, which would have been part of the original data 10 years ago. And the Q300 still operational, was operational 10 years ago. In terms of flight paths, I address in my evidence to the hearing, but flight paths can change rather quickly. And the example I've submitted were not present in 2010. In fact, the examples which put aircraft movement outside of the control zone boundaries came into force 18th of July last year. Meteorological conditions, the predominant wind is a westerly here at the Hamilton Airport, and the aircraft or the runway is north-south, so there's not a significant effect when it comes to Met conditions, other than Hamilton's renowned for its fog, and that can close the airport, which obviously reduces operations. Aircraft movements, as mentioned, the loss of jet operations and international flights reduces the amount of movements, the closure and the removal of Eagle Air and the Beech 1900 aircraft reduced routes and actually reduced the amount of capacity or amount of movements those aircrafts did as Air New Zealand consolidated its fleet. In the time of operations, as I highlighted in my hearing report, the aircraft operations generally operate between 6 in the morning to 8:30 at night, and are generally set up for the first arrival about 7:20 in the morning. And also, I was in contact with one of my colleagues out at the airport who, just to give a bit of weight, there's about 10 aircraft turnarounds a day. So that's the aircraft there and the aircraft takes off, and 3 aircraft which do the overnight. So that just gives you a bit of movements about how many aircraft movements in terms of commercial operations happen as an average. Also, on the point B on the 149 talks about Waipa. That also could be affected in terms of the subdivision control boundary extending to the south. I think it's important to note that there's never been a residential development to the south, in the same way that Waipa hasn't developed that in the way that Waikato has done in Tamihere. And it's also, I think, important to give some other context. The other regional airports of similar size, Palmerston North and Invercargill, both in type of operations and their runway length, and both have what I'll call urban residential, so that 400 to 800 square metre sections within 2 kilometres of their runway. Well, I'm sitting here at 3.5 kilometres from the runway, so it's very different comparable what's been permitted around the country. Point C, I want to touch in a different area, but point F, for note, I'll provide my strongest criticism, and that's this commentary around this strategic long-term plan out to 2030 for the airport. I would basically say that plan has been a failure. The planned aviation growth has not occurred. The aircraft, or the runway extension has not occurred. And while I admit in 2010 it had good intentions, I don't think it's anything more than a wish list and a fantasy. No weight should be given to this 2030 plan, as there's been the modelling which has been predicted hasn't occurred. And I will, with the panel's indulgence, provide a little bit more insight. I'll highlight that the airport last year did not, or even currently haven't pursued funding from the Provincial Growth Fund, at least for the runway extension, despite one significant shareholder actively pushing the airport to actually fund it. And I note that the Waikato District Council didn't support that shareholder to instruct the airport to look for funding. Last year, I was in the headquarters of Sichuan Airlines in Chengdu in China, lobbying them to consider Hamilton as the New Zealand destination, because they currently at the time flew into Auckland, and Hamilton and Chengdu are sister cities. I can report that the airport were not supportive of this idea, which I think is at odds with the 2030 plan, and indeed their media statements in 2010, 2011, when they were promoting this idea. I think the airport's long-term future has become more uncertain. Financially, they have previously bled money from their shareholders. The current economic environment will significantly dent the income and the capacity of the airport, and any jet operations, be it international or domestic, will incur significant startup costs for security and border services, and when they're operationalised, the operator will be taking the full cost for that at Hamilton, rather than places like Auckland and Christchurch, where the airlines share the cost of those border facilities. Well, I think there's an additional challenge facing the airport in terms of establishing an international service, as the Hamilton to Auckland rail link becomes operational, and the future-proofing that the rail link will have into Auckland Airport itself. So my point from this part of the submission is that any reference or any reliance on a 2030 master plan for the airport needs to be protected, should be regarded because it has no evidential value, and to date has been proven inaccurate. I also want to comment on, there's a line which both Ms. Drew and Ms. Chibnall had made mention, and that's my commentary around the horse is already bolted. And I do want to thank Mr. Crisp for his for his pictures, especially the one of Birchwood Lane, because the one that he did put up of Birchwood Lane 10 years ago, none of that existed. 10 years ago, Birchwood Lane stopped at what is known as Vinters Lane now, and there was nothing but maze. And I encourage anyone in their spare time to go have a look on Google Maps and that street view. That no longer exists, as we saw. There's a wonderful new road going through there. So if I compare it to my own personal context around this, so 295 Neil Road was a 10-acre property which had one dwelling. That was my childhood home. My parents and my sister lived there, and there was nothing from Newells Road, from the entrance there, through to the state highway. It was nothing but paddocks and maize crop. In 2010, my parents subdivided. We sold the 295 property and had a bit of acreage with it, probably around about that 5,000-6,000 mark, and recreated a 295A, which was the remaining 8 or so acres of the property. And then from then, we've subdivided off as Birchwood Lane went through. 2 further developments, properties came off the back. So, currently, so where we sit right now, we have the same 10 acres that we had in 2010 as the original homestead, the house that we currently live in, as well as a separate 70 square metre dwelling, another 2 dwellings which access Birchwood Lane. So we've gone from one house with 4 people in it to 5 dwellings with about 10 to 15 people at any one time in there. And also, obviously, in the current climate, I've been doing a lot of walking around our wee area and just counting, and very colloquially, the area which was farmland is now at least 8 or 10 new dwellings which have gone in immediately north of us, not to mention an additional 5 or 6 dwellings which have gone in either side of us in the past 5 years. So I would seek, if anyone wants to actually see what this development looks like, come have a walk. And I would actually sort of put it out there. If any of the panel wanted to walk down Birchwood Lane and could tell me where the noise controls are or the subdivision control boundary starts and finishes, I'd be impressed if you could do it without the map in your hand. And just moving a little bit further on, there was a comment made that there shouldn't be much weight given to the absence of complaints. I would argue that this is probably inaccurate, given that the whole reverse sensitivity issue brought up by the airport is around noise and noise complaints. And if we've got a community living inside this boundary, which hasn't been complaining, then we're saying that there is a certain degree of harmony that occurs between the airport and the Tamihere community. Just one of my sort of final comments is there was a sort of another discussion point that there hadn't been a large multi-lot subdivision in the area, or there was actually only one in 2010. And I think that might be a little bit disingenuous to actually explaining what's actually out here, because there has been development in there. And I think why you haven't seen multi-lot subdivision is mainly due to most of the people out here are the mum and dad property owners who've been out here for 10, 15, 20 years and don't really have the cash flow to pay for the DCs to take off each land. So they have to sell one to then get the income in to sell the second one to then, until eventually properties 3 and 4 might actually be the returns that they're looking for. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to say there hasn't been a large multi-lot subdivision, because I think you'll find there's a significant amount of single lot subdivisions occurring. So yes, if there's an image that this airport noise control zone is some bare acreage of undeveloped, uninhabited land, but I think that needs to be dismissed, that this is actually an inhabitable area. So as I said, there was this comment that things have been, it's to hold the line. Well, the line hasn't been held since 2010. Development has occurred. There's significant infrastructure has been put in to allow development to occur. And I'm listening to the other speakers there, they're all asking for 3,000 square metres in the country living zone. Where we are, and I think there's other submitters as well, just asking for us to come down to the 5,000, which is the norm for the area. That's all I really have on that, but I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Howarth. Let's just see if there are any questions for you. Mr. Fulton, anything from you? Can you?
Mute your mic, Dines.
Sorry about that. No, no questions at this stage. I think we'll hear the rebuttal evidence from the airport company shortly, and I think we'll have some questions around that. I think Jason's led us into asking the right questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Yahoo?
I don't have any questions. I just really want to thank you for your evidence.
Thank you. Mr. Kearney?
Just one, you said that the airport use has changed in recent times. There's no jets coming in, etc. And that's sort of underpinned one of the reasons for removing this restriction on subdivision. The airport authority says that the airport is the second busiest regional airport. It attracts over 140,000 aircraft movements per annum, caters for approximately 380,000 domestic passengers, and numbers are growing at a rate of 7% per annum. So we have to look a 10-year horizon in terms of the district plan. But what the evidence that's been presented to us from the airport authority is to say that this is a very busy airport. So it's just not limited to jet use of the restriction. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I was trying to avoid that one without sounding like I'm really trying to put the foot into the airport. Yeah, I do accept that there's 140,000 movements every year, but they are of small Cessna-based aircraft, in which myself have probably been a stat 10 years ago where I do 5 or 6 flights a day, but I'm not operating in the Hamilton Airport vicinity. If I can provide a little bit of, put my airplane hat on, if we are doing flight training, which is primarily what those movements are made up of, we use either the grass runways, we make a left-hand turn or right-hand turn, so inside the airport boundary, and we head either east or west to the control zone, to leave the control zone, because we don't want to talk to controllers. So we either west of Templeview or east of Cambridge, and that's where we conduct our operations. So while the movement is a takeoff or a landing, they are relatively confined within the actual airport operations, and even to the work of doing what's known as a circuit, so land, touch and go, fly, do a big circle and land again. Those confines sort of sit within inside for the river and the overhead at Mystery Creek and sort of the immediate 1.5 to 2 miles of the runway, or immediate kilometre, 2 kilometres of the runway. And that's just an aviation provision, because if you're operating in the circuit, you've got to be within gliding distance should the engine go cut out. So that's just an aviation point. So to count where we are about 3-4 kilometres out, sort of.
So you're really saying that the airport authority is overstating its case?
I think so. It is the second busiest airport, I have no doubt. But I mean, if you were to compare the busiest airport, Auckland, they actually forbid any light aircraft operations outside of emergency. So yeah, we're not comparing apples with apples. Okay, and also you can also just make a further comment. They did talk about being the third longest runway. Well, that's also a little bit contestable as well, because the Invercargill is technically longer. It's where you want to draw the line on the piece of sea.
Okay, thank you.
I've just got one question, I think, Mr. Houth, and that is that we're obliged to sort of look forwards, not backwards. And I think there's a general sort of paradigm that says, all predictions are wrong, but some are useful. And you've explained how the circumstances at the airport have changed quite dramatically from over the last 10 years, from what was contemplated then versus what's happening now. Hamilton, as I would see it, continues to say that it's it's going to be the hub of New Zealand, it's important, it's going to grow, and all those sorts of things. If that happens, isn't it conceivable that the airport plans might be rejuvenated and dusted off? And you know, it isn't an international airport at the moment, but it could be, and all those sorts of things. And isn't the last thing you'd want to have happen is to have all the NIMBYs coming along saying, I hate living next to this airport, it's too damn noisy, I moved here for the peace and quiet of the country, and all of a sudden it's not. And I sort of relate that to something a bit closer to home here, with the military's operations at Whenuapai Airport. And there was talk of turning that into a hub airport to support Auckland International. And there were just about marches on the council offices up here because of people saying it's going to absolutely, you know, ruin our quiet enjoyment of our residential suburb, etc., etc. And wouldn't we want to plan for the eventuality of Hamilton Airport developing at some point in the future? And rather than turning a blind eye to that and just saying, well, let's just forget that it's there, would that not be a bit irresponsible?
Yeah, I take your points there, but I'll provide just a couple of wee bits. What suggests that Hamilton will be the next international airport for New Zealand? If I was to look at the wider aviation management, New Zealand is probably already over-serviced by international airports. It has Christchurch and Auckland, and Wellington as sort of a backup in Queenstown because of its little tourist mecca. There is nothing which suggests to me that jet operations or indeed larger scale operations would actually occur in Hamilton. And I even the conversations, and I am being a little bit coy with this answer because I am subject to a non-disclosure which I had with the airport company in my previous role. There doesn't seem to be an active intent. They can to want to explore those options because it just becomes too costly. And I understand that, you know, we're now 10 years on from the previous assessment, and the provision has gone the other way. We used to have jet operations and now we don't. So what's saying that Air New Zealand just goes, no, we don't want to service Hamilton anymore? It now can have a fast train to Auckland, and there's nothing saying that decline can't also continue to happen. And if I put another spin on it, as I said, I've been living, or my family have been living here in Newells Road for the past 30 years. We were here before the airport was a thing, before Ewan Wilson and Kiwi Air came along, before Freedom Air came along, and we happily lived in sync with that. And I think that's where I'm sort of asking the panel to look at it, that the community and the airport can work in sync, because that's what we're doing at the moment. And future jet operations, I don't see a second Auckland International coming here.
Okay, all right, no, that's clear enough, thank you. I know I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much for your evidence and explanation of it. I'm just mindful of the fact that we're 7 minutes away from resuming at 1 o'clock for block 3, Ms. Kelly. I don't think that's realistic. I just wonder if you're able to send a quick note to the people that are on the list for there. That includes the people that are on this session as well, to say that this afternoon session won't be resuming until how long do people need for lunch?
Half an
So
hour.
let's call it. Yeah, should we say? I think we need half an hour. We need to clear our heads as well and get a bit of fresh air. So we'll resume at 25 past. Would you be able to let people know that we're running a little bit behind, and don't be afraid if. Actually, I suppose the other option might be to do us. I'm just thinking out loud, for you to let them know, but also to log on to the meeting and put us, type something on a bit of paper that says we're running late. This session will not now commence till 1:25.
Sure.
And then people that are logging on to the meeting will be live, and people logging onto it will know we'll be there shortly.
Sure thing.
I think that might work.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll adjourn until 1:25. Thank you to the submitters that have presented to us this morning, given us a bit of food for thought, obviously, as always, and we'll resume on the other meeting request channel at 1:25. Thank you.